Hi, my name is Margaret Redlick. I wrote a book called Don't Call It Bollywood and a blog on a website called Don't Call It Bollywood because I have no imagination. And I'm doing an experiment with YouTube videos to see how that works out. This is the video slideshow version of a post that's available on my website, part of an epic 25 plus series of scene-by-scene analysis of DDLJ, which is not only my favorite film, but also an incredibly important film in Indian film history. And in particular, I want to talk about the famous morning after scene and exactly how and why it is so brilliant. DDLJ, obviously, is a brilliant movie and a film classic, but what can be hard to appreciate from the perspective of the present day is just how revolutionary it was when it came out. I wish I had been able to appreciate that myself, but I couldn't. DDLJ was only the third Indian film I saw, and by the time I came back to it, knowing more about Indian movies and so on, I couldn't recapture that first time watching it feeling. I'm going to try to do that now, working backwards based on what I know about Indian film history and so on, to recreate exactly why it was so amazing for that first audience, especially this scene. By the time we get to this scene, we've already seen a lot of rules being broken. For instance, in Rucha Odivana, Shahrukh drops and steps over Kajal, which she did not even know was going to happen in real life, famously. So her shock reaction here is real. And just before this scene starts, we've had Zarasa Jumlu Ne, which ends with Shahrukh, seemingly drunk, carrying her off. And now we have Kajal waking up in bed in a man's shirt with disheveled hair and no makeup, trying to figure out what has happened. This is really revolutionary for Indian film. There have been plenty of movies before this that had played around with the idea of sex before marriage. Aradhana, obviously, and Humdum from Bobby. It's pretty clear what's going on in that song. However, it's always a fantasy. You'll cut to Switzerland or the mountains at the last minute. You never actually see the heroine walking out of the room rearranging her clothing. But here we have that. The audience has suddenly been dropped into a scene that they've never seen before in Indian film. I'm pretty sure the original audience's faces looked almost as shocked as Kajal's did here. The other thing to remember from the perspective of 2017 is that the original audience hadn't seen all of the films that were inspired by DDLJ. We've seen plenty of movies now where the hero and heroine actually do go all the way. They fight, they become friends, they have a wild night together, and then, of course, they actually fall in love and get married. Neil and Nikki, for instance, which I may be the only person in the world who appreciated, but I did enjoy the way it twisted DDLJ slightly. And then we've also had other movies where the hero doesn't go that far. Sure, he seems like a bad boy, he flirts a bit, but he respects the heroine's morality and sense of right and wrong and pulls back at the last minute. We can relax. Ye Javani Hey Devani has a hero like this. There's plenty of others. But DDLJ, for the original audience, this was a new kind of movie. The hero and heroine talked like people actually talked. They dressed like people actually dressed. So maybe they're going to have sex like people actually have sex. Not some huge fantasy, but some drunken, mistaken night on vacation with some random guy. And that's what Kajal's thinking here. Is this what all my fantasies have come to? I go out for this last trip of freedom, and I end up waking up in bed, not even able to remember what happened the night before with a strange boy. And to add to the strangeness, Shahrukh is acting very strange in this scene, different from the Raj character we've seen before in the movie. He's a little too kind, a little too considerate. It's confusing. We don't really know what's happening. It's a little bit like a dream, where everything's almost like normal, but just slightly off, and you don't quite understand how you got to where you are. And that's what Kajal asks. How did I get here? The audience is feeling this a little bit too. not just confused as to what's happening with the characters, but what's happening on screen. This whole scene is slightly off. Shahruk's performance isn't the standard kind of Indian film actor performance. He's underplaying it a little bit more than we're used to, especially compared to what he's been doing in the rest of the film. The set isn't the usual Indian film kind of set. This isn't some fantasy luxury hotel suite in Switzerland. This is just somebody's living room, really, in Switzerland. It's a little too realistic. And even Kajal's reaction is a little too small here, based on what we're used to. She's not hysterical, she's not suicidal, like other Indian film heroines have been in the morning after scene. She's just sort of strangely calm. It almost feels like some random German art film has been dropped into our Indian drama. And then it gets stranger when the dialogue starts referring back to things that we have ourselves in the audience seen in this film up to this point. Shahrukh mentions that Kajal was very drunk last night. Yes, she was drunk last night. He says what happened last night was bound to happen. We, the audience, know that this is true. We've been watching this couple fight and fall in love now for over 2 hours. So maybe it did happen. Maybe this is truly a different kind of a movie. After all, this morning after scene may be different, but it's very realistic. It's similar to morning after scenes that Shahrukh would do later in his career in films like Chalte Chalte, where the couple is legitimately married, or Jab Tak Hai Jaan with the whole amnesia explanation. Only in this case, it's a morning after without any of those excuses. And it's a morning after in the mid-90s, when it was just not an acceptable thing to show. And so we are the same as Kajal, going, no, this could never have happened. What is going on in this film? How can we have this sweet morning after scene when we're not even to the interval yet? And that's when Shahrukh breaks. Shahrukh and Aditya Chopra, the director. See, the thing is, Kajal is spinning into hysteria at this point. She's about to start truly panicking, not just having this strange calm. And what you don't want as a director is for the audience to fall into that hysteria with her. Kajal is such an emotional actress. It's very easy for us to get sucked into her emotions and start feeling everything she's feeling. And at that point, you end up with an entire audience just sobbing or not able to look at the screen, not able to pay attention. So Adi has to shock us out of that. So he has Shahrukh turn on a dime from that serious, real kind of performance to this laughing, boyish, clearly it's a joke as soon as Kajal looks away for just a moment. So okay, now the audience knows where we are. Kajal is fooled, but we aren't. And we can move from her panic into just anger at Shahrukh for all he is doing. There's a reason that we had to have this switch right here. There's a chance that the audience was going to fall into Kajal's panic, but more likely we would pull ourselves out of it and just start laughing. Like Ish. Has anyone else seen Ish? Terrible movie. One of the funniest bits of it is Kajal's big dramatic suicide scene, which starts out seeming sad, and then as it goes on and on and on, and she gets more and more hysterical, it just ends up being kind of silly, and you find yourself getting the giggles. The thing is, you can't handle that peak of emotion for so long. The audience themselves is going to pull themselves out of it and start laughing or reacting in some other way. And so we're pulled out of it before we get the close-up of Kajal's face, where you can feel that can't breathe, trying to hold back tears, panicky feeling. You don't want the audience to feel that. You want the audience to be outside of it for a moment so they can appreciate the whole story you're telling, not get lost in this one character. And so the audience is looking at the story as a whole when we have this next moment, when Shahrukh argues that obviously they did sleep together because of the lipstick on his chest, which, by the way, proves that most likely he knew Kajal had never slept with anyone because this looks very fake. It's also an important moment because it brings the audience to such a pitch of rage at Shahrukh. This wasn't a last-minute joke he played. This was something he planned in advance. He had this ready to go to tease her, and now we are so angry at him. We are waiting for him to do something else that will make us even angrier, which means we are paying incredibly close attention to his performance and to what he's saying. And that's important because Aditya Chopra wanted to make sure we paid really, really close attention to the end of this scene. So he had to get us right there, laser focused on Shahrukh, no longer feeling what Kajol was feeling. And then he has to rattle really quick through a lot of exposition. The exposition here, that's not the point of the scene. We don't need to know that Shahrukh was joking. We don't need to know that she passed out and he took her clothes off without looking and all of that stuff. I mean, we do need to know. We need to know the facts somehow before we can move on. But we don't need to really think about it in any way. And so this part is very rushed. Shahrukh says the dialogue extremely quickly, words tripping over themselves. And Aditya films it in a very simple manner, straightforward, head-on. We get the information, but we aren't paying much attention to the characters or their emotions or their performances while we're hearing it. And this is why it matters. Now see, any other director could have ended this scene any number of ways. They could have had Shahrukh apologize and beg forgiveness. They could have had the couple simply embrace as he tries to calm her panic. They could have had Kajol apologize for doubting him. Anything to get the characters to a point of being slightly closer than where they were before. But because Aditya Chopra is a genius, he saw what he was doing and decided to use it as an opportunity. He is going to put in a new dimension to their relationship and a new message to the film because of this emotional tangle they have just gotten into. Shahrukh has to pull her out of her hysteria, convince her once and for all that he is someone she can trust. And so he goes into the famous Hindustani speech. As the speech starts, his voice gets deeper. At the time watching it, it was a signifier that he's finally telling her he is a man. All along, he's been acting very boyishly towards her. Even when, if you think about it, he's been acting in a very manly fashion. They're traveling alone. He found food. He found housing. He found transportation. He's taking care of her. And yet he acts like a boy. He speaks fast. He speaks light. He moves casually. He doesn't sort of force his masculinity on her until now. Now, he's letting his voice get deep and rough, reminding her that he's a grown man she's traveling with. For an audience in 2017, there's an extra dimension here because this is the voice he's grown into. This is what his voice always sounds like now. It's like we get a little time travel version of middle-aged Shahrukh in the middle of this baby-faced Shahrukh. Now we get to the big line, the reclaiming of the Hindustani identity by the NRI. What I love about the way this line is delivered is the way Hindustani sort of lingers on his tongue, like it's a sacred word, like he loves saying it, like it has deep meaning to him. It's not just the words he's saying, it's the way he's saying them that tells Kajol and the audience that this is an identity that has deep meaning for him and she can count on that. The next statement, he says it slightly lighter, a little more like an affirmation, like it's something that she would obviously already know, and he's just reminding her of it. And you can see her beginning to calm down a little. I can't tell you what Kajol does differently in this shot, but somehow her face looks a little less panicked. You can tell that she's paying attention to what he's saying. He's pulled her out of her spin. And now is when it becomes personal. The first two statements, those were just general Hindustani identity statements. This is about the two of them and what they have shared without acknowledging it over the past couple of days. He can't imagine doing that even in his dreams to her, not just to any Hindustani woman, but to her in particular. And he's begging her to trust him in particular, not just any Hindustani man. And this last line, in some ways, this is the most important one. Not the words. The words are meaningless. Don't worry about the words. But the tone. It's a very specific tone he's using here. he doesn't care about the words anymore either. He's just using them to convey the message that he loves her, that everything's okay, that he would do anything for her. The love is dripping off of what he's saying. He could be saying any words in the world, and she would get the message based on how he's saying it. The same tone he uses in Kalhona Ho in that scene where he tells Preeti, I don't love you, and we in the audience all know he really does. It's not because of what he's saying, it's because of how he's saying it. And that's what Kajal responds to when she embraces him. There's a couple of steps to this embrace, but they go very fast, so I couldn't get screenshots. Kajal embraces him, her eyes close, her hand rubs his back, her eyes open. Meanwhile, Shahrukh lets his cheek rest on her head, and then suddenly seems alert in awareness as well. It's very quick moments, but what it tells you is that Kajal has sunk into the comfort of his love, and then suddenly catches herself when she feels herself responding to it. Shahrukh catches himself when he feels her responding. He's not worried about his emotions. He knows he can take care of himself. He's worried about her emotions in response to him. And that's why he changes his tone very suddenly at the end of this scene. Back to the teasing, light boyishness. He has just affirmed once and for all that he is a man, that he respects her, that she is safe with him. Which means now he can joke about her not being safe again. Because now they both know it truly is a joke. And he's telling her, it's okay, I'm going to back off, I'm going to go back to that teasing, friendly guy you've known before. I'm not going to try to build on that moment we just had. I'm going to leave it up to you. And that's why we end with Kajal. Really, Kajal is the driving force of this movie. She's the one who sang Shahruk's character into existence in Mary Quabone, her very first song. She's the one who wanted to go on vacation in Europe. She's the one who got drunk the night before and brought them to this point. And now, she's the one who, for just a moment, is feeling a sort of euphoria of love. They may not have actually had sex last night, but they did just share something equally meaningful. She smiles to herself for a moment as she feels what she's feeling, closes her eyes to sort of hold on to that feeling, laughs at herself a little bit because it's silly, and then stops laughing as she realizes that this isn't something she can just enjoy, this isn't something she can laugh at. This is something that she will have to choose what she wants to do about, because Shahrukh has just told her that it's up to her. He's not going to hug her, he's not going to say, I love you. He's going to joke and walk away, and she gets to decide. And that's how the scene ends, with Kajal thinking about her decision.